The hospital phone rang at 3:47 a.m. Rome time, and the doctor's voice carried the kind of exhaustion that comes from delivering bad news too many times. "Mrs. Cobain, I'm very sorry, but you need to prepare yourself. Your husband's brain activity is minimal. The overdose was severe. We've done everything we can, but at this point, we don't expect him to regain consciousness." Courtney Love stood in the bathroom of their Seattle home. The phone pressed so hard against her ear it hurt. Frances Bean, not yet 2 years old, was sleeping in the next room. It was March 4, 1994, and Kurt Cobain had been found unconscious in his Rome hotel room 18 hours earlier. A lethal combination of champagne and Rohypnol in his system. "Put the phone to his ear," Courtney said, her voice shaking but determined. "Mrs. Cobain, I don't think—" "I said put the fucking phone to his ear, now!" The doctor hesitated, then she heard movement, footsteps, the rustle of hospital sheets. What happened in the next 20 minutes would remain one of the most mysterious moments in rock and roll history. Because nobody except Courtney Love knows what she said to her unconscious husband. And 30 years later, she still refuses to tell anyone. But what is known is this: Kurt Cobain woke up. To understand why this moment matters, you need to understand where Kurt and Courtney were in March 1994. Their relationship had become tabloid fuel, a toxic circus of love, drugs, fame, and mutual destruction that the media couldn't stop watching. But underneath all the chaos, there was something real, something desperate, something that neither of them knew how to handle. Kurt had been spiraling for months. The success of Nevermind had turned him into exactly what he never wanted to be: a mainstream rock star, the voice of a generation he didn't ask to represent. He was in constant physical pain from an undiagnosed stomach condition. He was using heroin to cope, and he was suffocating under the weight of fame, expectation, and his own demons. The European tour in early 1994 was supposed to be a fresh start. Nirvana was promoting In Utero, an album Kurt was actually proud of, darker and rawer than Nevermind. But the tour was a disaster from the beginning. Kurt was using heavily, his performances were erratic, and the tension within the band was obvious to everyone. On March 3rd, after a show in Munich, Kurt and Courtney had a massive fight in their Rome hotel room at the Excelsior Hotel. The details of that fight have never been fully revealed, but people in neighboring rooms reported hearing shouting, things breaking, Courtney screaming, "You're killing yourself and you're killing us." At some point during that fight, Courtney left to meet a friend. When she returned to the hotel at 6:30 a.m. on March 4th, she found Kurt unconscious on the floor, an empty bottle of Rohypnol beside him, champagne spilled on the carpet. She called an emergency, and Kurt was rushed to Umberto I Polyclinic Hospital. The initial reports said it was an accident, that Kurt had mixed champagne with prescription tranquilizers without realizing the danger. But the sheer amount of Rohypnol in his system, 50 to 60 pills, suggested something more deliberate. The doctors who treated him were convinced it was a suicide attempt. Courtney flew back to Seattle in a panic, where she immediately entered a drug rehabilitation program. She was trying to get clean, trying to save herself, trying to figure out how to save Kurt. But when the hospital called at 3:47 a.m. Seattle time to say that Kurt wasn't expected to wake up, she fell apart. She'd been clean for less than 48 hours. Frances was sleeping in the next room, and the man she loved, the father of her child, the person who understood her in ways nobody else did, was dying 6,000 miles away. That's when she demanded the doctor put the phone to Kurt's ear. What happened next has been pieced together from hospital records, interviews with medical staff, and the few details Courtney has let slip over the years. But the actual words she spoke remain a complete mystery. The doctor, a man named Dr. Osvaldo Galetta, placed the phone next to Kurt's ear. Courtney started talking. At first, her voice was quiet, but gradually it got louder, more intense. Dr. Galetta later told a journalist that he stepped out of the room to give her privacy, but he could hear her voice through the door, rising and falling, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes tender. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping. Nurses who were monitoring Kurt's vital signs during that phone call reported something strange. About 7 minutes in, his heart rate started to increase. At 12 minutes, his brainwave activity spiked. At 18 minutes, his eyelids started to flutter. At exactly 20 minutes, Kurt Cobain opened his eyes. Dr. Galetta rushed back into the room when the monitors started going crazy. Kurt was awake, disoriented, trying to pull out his IV line. The doctor grabbed the phone, which was still connected. "Mrs. Cobain, your husband is awake. He's conscious." Courtney's response, according to Dr. Galetta, was to scream, "Put him on the phone, right fucking now." What Kurt and Courtney said to each other in that moment, with Kurt barely conscious and Courtney sobbing in Seattle, has never been revealed. The call lasted another 5 minutes before Kurt became too exhausted to continue. But here's what makes this story even more mysterious. In all the years since, through divorces, lawsuits, tell-all books, and endless interviews, Courtney Love has never revealed what she said to Kurt during those initial 20 minutes when he was unconscious. She's been asked hundreds of times. Journalists, biographers, friends, even Frances Bean has asked. Courtney's answer is always the same. "That's between me and Kurt. Nobody else gets to know." In a 2015 interview with Rolling Stone, she came the closest she's ever come to explaining. "I said things that I needed to say. Things that only he would understand. Things that maybe brought him back because he knew I meant them. But they're not for anyone else. They're sacred." When pressed further, she added, "Look, I'm not a private person. I've shared every fucking thing about my life, often things I shouldn't have. But those 20 minutes, that's the one thing I get to keep." The medical staff at Umberto I Polyclinic Hospital were stunned by Kurt's recovery. Dr. Galetta, who had been convinced Kurt wouldn't survive, told the press, "I've never seen anything like it. The human will to live can be extraordinary, but this was beyond that. It was like something called him back." Kurt remained in the hospital for 5 more days, undergoing tests and psychological evaluation. Courtney flew to Rome as soon as Kurt was stable enough for visitors. Their reunion was private, but hospital staff reported hearing both of them crying, then laughing, then crying again. When Kurt was finally released from the hospital on March 9th, he made a brief statement to the press. "I'm sorry for scaring everyone. I made a mistake. I'm getting help." But he refused to answer any questions about what Courtney had said to him on the phone. "That's private," was all he would say. The Rome incident was officially reported as an accidental overdose, but everyone close to Kurt knew it was a suicide attempt, and everyone wondered what Courtney could have possibly said that was powerful enough to bring him back from the edge of death. Over the years, people who were close to them have speculated. Chris Novoselic, Nirvana's bassist, suggested in a 2005 interview that Courtney might have talked about Frances. Kurt lived for that little girl. Maybe Courtney reminded him of what he had to live for. But Courtney has denied this. "I didn't manipulate him with Frances. That's gross. What I said was more complicated than that." Dave Grohl, Nirvana's drummer, thinks it might have been about their shared understanding of pain. Kurt and Courtney both came from really fucked up backgrounds. They understood each other's damage in a way nobody else could. Maybe she said something that reminded him he wasn't alone. Others have suggested that Courtney might have made promises about getting clean together, or threats about what she'd do if he left her, or confessions about her own struggles. But these are all just guesses. The only other clue came from Kurt's personal journals, which were published in 2002. In an entry dated March 10, 1994, the day after he was released from the hospital, Kurt wrote, "C saved my life with words only she could say. I don't deserve her, but I'm grateful I have her. I'm going to try harder, for her, for Frances, for the music." That entry is followed by several pages of lyrics that never became songs, most of them dealing with themes of redemption, second chances, and the power of love to pull someone back from darkness. But if Kurt was planning to try harder, to fight his demons and save himself, those plans fell apart quickly. Within days of returning to Seattle, he was using again. By March 18th, 2 weeks after the Rome incident, Courtney staged an intervention with friends and family, trying to get Kurt to enter rehab. Kurt agreed, checking into the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles on March 30th. But he lasted less than 2 days, climbing over the facility's fence on April 1st and disappearing. 7 days later, on April 8, 1994, Kurt Cobain was found dead in his Seattle home from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The tragedy of the Rome phone call is that it worked, but only temporarily. Whatever Courtney said brought Kurt back from unconsciousness, gave him a few more weeks of life, but couldn't save him from himself. In the immediate aftermath of Kurt's death, the media was vicious toward Courtney. They blamed her for his drug use, suggested she'd driven him to suicide, turned their complicated relationship into a simple villain narrative. The fact that she'd literally called him back from the edge of death in Rome was forgotten or ignored. Courtney herself spiraled after Kurt's death, struggling with grief, addiction, and the responsibility of raising Francis alone. But she never stopped protecting those 20 minutes on the phone. In a 1995 interview, visibly intoxicated and heartbroken, she was asked again what she'd said to Kurt in that hospital room. "I gave him the most honest version of myself that I've ever given anyone. I told him truths that I'd been too scared to say out loud, and it brought him back. For a little while, it brought him back. But I couldn't keep him here. Nobody could." As years passed and Courtney got sober, cleaned up her life, and rebuilt her relationship with Francis, the question kept coming up. In a 2014 interview marking the 20th anniversary of Kurt's death, she was asked if she'd ever consider revealing what she said. "No, never. That's not mine to share. Those were words meant for Kurt's ears only, even if he couldn't consciously hear them. They worked because they were true and because they were private. The moment I make them public, they stop being what they were." The interviewer pressed, "But don't you think people deserve to know? Don't you think it might help someone else?" Courtney's response was sharp. "You know what might help someone? Understanding that some things are sacred. Understanding that not everything needs to be shared, consumed, analyzed. I've lived my whole life in public, made every mistake in front of cameras, but those 20 minutes belong to me and Kurt. That's it." There have been numerous theories over the years about what Courtney might have said. Some believe she revealed a secret about Francis that Kurt didn't know. Others think she confessed to an affair or threatened to leave him. Some romantics believe she simply told him how much she loved him in the most raw, honest way possible. But all of these theories miss the point. What matters isn't what Courtney said. What matters is that she said something so powerful, so true, so essential, that it pulled an unconscious man back to life. What matters is that in their messy, toxic, beautiful, destructive relationship, there was a core of something real enough to perform what doctors called a medical impossibility. Dr. Galetta, the physician who witnessed Kurt's awakening, retired from medicine in 2010. In his final interview before retirement, he was asked about the most remarkable thing he'd witnessed in 40 years of practice. A woman brought her husband back from the edge of death with nothing but words. "I don't know what she said. I don't need to know. But I know it was real. I know love is more powerful than we give it credit for. And I know that some mysteries should stay mysteries." The Rome phone call represents something profound about Kurt and Courtney's relationship that gets lost in all the drama and tabloid coverage. Underneath the chaos, there was genuine connection. Underneath the addiction and fighting, there was real love. And in that moment, when Kurt was closest to death, it was Courtney's voice that brought him back. The fact that he died 6 weeks later doesn't diminish that moment. If anything, it makes it more poignant. Courtney gave Kurt a few more weeks of life. She gave Francis a few more weeks with her father. She gave Nirvana fans a few more days of hoping things might get better. And she carries the weight of knowing that she saved him once, but couldn't save him permanently. In recent years, as the 30th anniversary of Kurt's death has passed, Courtney has become more philosophical about that night. In a 2024 podcast interview, she reflected on it with unusual clarity. People want me to reveal what I said like it's some magic formula that can save anyone who's suicidal. But it's not. It was specific to Kurt, to our relationship, to that moment. What saved him that night was connection, was being reminded that he mattered to someone, that his story wasn't over yet. But everyone's story is different. Everyone needs to hear different words. She paused, then added, I do think about those 20 minutes every day. I think about the fact that my voice reached him when nothing else could. I think about the fact that I had that power once and then lost it. But I also think that maybe the point wasn't to save him forever. Maybe the point was just to give him a little more time. And we got that. The host asked if she had any regrets about keeping the contents of the call private. None. Zero. Those words were a gift I gave to Kurt in his darkest moment. They don't belong to the world. They belong to us. And keeping them private is the last way I can protect what we had from being turned into content, into a story, into something people consume and forget. Frances Bean Cobain, now in her 30s, has also been asked about the phone call. She was too young to remember any of it, but she's lived with the legend her whole life. My mom won't tell me what she said, and I respect that. I used to be angry about it, felt like I had a right to know. But I've come to understand that their relationship was theirs, not mine. I know my dad loved me. I know my mom loved him. And I know that for 20 minutes, her love was literally powerful enough to bring him back to life. That's enough. The mystery of what Courtney said to Kurt in that Rome hospital room has become part of rock and roll mythology. It's been referenced in songs, depicted in movies, analyzed in documentaries. But the actual words remain unknown. And maybe that's how it should be. In a world where everything is shared, documented, and monetized, there's something almost sacred about Courtney's refusal to reveal those 20 minutes. It's a final act of protection, a boundary she won't cross, a gift she won't take back. Those words brought Kurt back from the edge of death once. They couldn't save him permanently, but they gave him a few more weeks on Earth. They gave Courtney the knowledge that she tried everything, that she reached him when nobody else could. And they remain the most private thing in one of the most public relationships in rock and roll history. That's the real story of the Rome phone call, not what was said, but what it represented. A moment of pure connection between two damaged people who loved each other in ways they couldn't always control or understand. A moment when words were enough to change everything, even if only temporarily. Courtney Love will die someday without ever revealing what she said. And maybe that's exactly how Kurt would have wanted it. Some things are meant to stay between two people, even when one of them is gone. The mystery remains. The love remains. And somewhere in those 20 minutes of one-sided conversation between a desperate wife and an unconscious husband, there's a truth so powerful it could wake the dead. But it's not for us to know. It's only for them.